make it tonight. So we're going to continue on with our work. So I appreciate you very much taking the time to be here. And obviously, the presentation tonight will be available on Google Docs. And the work that we're going to do over the next 2 months, probably 2 months, and I'll share a little bit more in detail about that, what I mean by that with the canine policy. There's going to be plenty of information to share. So, but we want to be respectful of your time, and again, appreciate you being here tonight, and we're going to move on. There is a lot that we need to try to cover tonight, and so we'll move pretty quickly through some of the agenda items. Since we don't have what I would consider a quorum, I'll forego getting approval of the minutes, and we'll take care of that at the next meeting when we have a much bigger crowd. Does anybody have any questions about anything or anything related to the minutes? Did anybody get a chance to review the minutes? Do you have any additions, changes, questions about them? Okay. Okay. And we'll bring it up at the next meeting to do the approvals and things. So tonight, I want to give you a brief update on the community engagement strategic plan that you all provided us recommendations for over the last couple of meetings. Lieutenant Croker and I were out of state last week at a community engagement conference, and so we didn't get some of the work done that we needed to in terms of the organizing it. We're really using your recommendations to learn from you and to figure out internally how are we going to put our groups together to digest what you've recommended to us and put it in a responsive form back to you. And so we're working through, Lieutenant Croker is forming some of those internal working groups now with your recommendations. And so at the June meeting, our next meeting, we'll respond back to your recommendations and let you know what additions or changes to the strategic plan were made as a result of the recommendations that you gave us. Any questions about that? The timing of that? I know at least one or two people had the question of, because we had set the deadline for, I think, the 25th of April, and some groups got their recommendations in after that, and were concerned or wanted to make sure that they were going to be considered, and absolutely. I mean, that's the date that we needed to set, because timelines are going to be important for us, and deadlines and a schedule, because we have much work to do over the next couple of years, and it's going to be really important that we stick to some of these deadlines so that we can make sure that we get this work done and these policies changed and trained and that sort of thing, because there's a lot of work that internally that happens after we establish a policy. And so I want us to continue to work together to set these deadlines and schedules, but it's going to be really important that we work together to be able to stick to them. So, but if there was any questions or doubt about what was submitted after the deadline, that's fine. It's absolutely going to be considered and submitted or reviewed as part of our response back to you. So tonight, over the last several months, we've been working with the monitor on drafting and proposing the canine policy. And you'll get the first look. You probably already have, if you haven't already looked at it. It should be up on Google Docs, and we shared that with you, I think, yesterday. But we're going to give you just a brief overview of what the canine unit, how it exists today. Just some very high-level things talking about how many teams that we have. We refer to them as teams, a handler and a dog. How many teams we have, kind of where they are, what are the breeds that we use, what's the chain of command like. And so we're going to give you, again, it's not an exhaustive presentation of the canine unit, but it will give you an overview of the canine unit as it stands today. And then there'll be some transition into some of the policies going forward now as we get into some of our work. Some recent policy, some examples of some policy changes that we've already made even recently that are actually probably one or two of them aren't even reflected in the policy that you have, because we're continuing to evaluate it and continuing to make some changes. So we're going to share a little bit of that. The canine team, as they've gone through the work, have prepared some reference documents that I think will help you in your review and being able to assess where we are in alignment with the stipulated judgment and being able to make some direct references in the policy versus what the stipulated judgment requires. So we're going to offer that to you as a helpful tool as well. And then after they're done, then I'll come back and share with, again, very brief and a generalized and overview of what use of force is in the police department, how it's defined, the different levels of force that we use, and just some of the foundational things that we use to form our policies regarding use of force. I did this because I think it's going to be very important as you read canine policy, as you read a reference to officer making decisions or the judgments that they exercise or the different types of responsibilities that they have to report up. I'm hopeful that this definition or this foundational information on use of force will help inform that conversation. I would tell you now that it is not exhaustive and it's not detailed. There is much more detailed and granular conversations that we'll have when we bring the specific use of force policies to you. And so I would ask you to just keep that in mind as we talk about this, because it is very much going to be very surface level things. But it's important, I think, and at least I hope it will be helpful to you to help inform your review and your research over the canine policy over the next period of time. And then right at the end, I'll kind of close out and offer for you kind of what a timeline for the work with regard to the canine policy and some things that we'll propose. Again, your input is going to be very important, but I think it is important for us to set some schedules and some guidelines to help us stay on track to make sure that we get this work done in a timely manner. So that's kind of what's going to be coming tonight. Are there any questions about? Yes, Joe.
Is this policy that we were shared with us, is this the new policy?
It is the proposed policy.
Proposed new policy.
But what I would tell you is that I think one of the examples you'll hear from the canine team tonight, we are continuing to work on it and we are continuing to make changes. And I think some of the changes that have been made even recently aren't yet reflected in that. This document is a document that we've been working with the monitor back and forth, getting it to a place that we both felt like we could now bring to you and allow you to go do your research and evaluate things and offer edits and changes that might improve the policy. And so that's been happening over the last many months, actually. But we're continuing to work on it on our own, and we've, again, like you said, we've already made some changes that aren't reflected in it. Yes?
Since this is an evolutionary process,
yes.
Come a significant portion when the stipulation judgment was first provided. Will there be some explanation of what the original policy that the stipulated judgment had in question as to what the current policy looks like? Do you see, because this is kind of the stipulated judgment is our guide, you said.
Yes.
So that kind of just gives us, okay, we've already addressed these issues provided in the stipulated judgment. Yeah,
that's why we gave you the current policy and the proposed policy, and then the team is going to provide you with an additional reference document to show you what the stipulated judgment requires and specifically where in the proposed policy it is there. You'll be able to cross-reference that with the current policy and find much of that content already there, but there is some changes for sure. But if there are, as you start to do the work, if you figure out something that might be more helpful to you for us to highlight perhaps specifically what changed and where, we can do that if you find it more helpful. But I think with the reference document that they're giving, you're going to be able to go very specifically in the stipulated judgment, and it'll point you directly where it is in the proposed policy. Then the question is there further clarity that might be needed? Is there another emerging best practice that is out there that we should consider? And that's really what we're going to be looking for you as you do your review of it and ask the question, is it in alignment with the stipulated judgment? I would also ask you, are there some other emerging best practices? Are there some other departments that are utilizing canine teams in a different way that we should consider as well? It's going to be very important that, and I would ask you that as you return your recommendations, that there be some evidence-based practices and being able to, so that we can refer back to and specifically go to and study and understand exactly what it is that you're recommending. But we're hopeful that what we're going to provide you tonight will help guide that and make it more streamlined and very specific, that you can point to and focus on very specific things. And we've kind of done some review, and I'll offer this at the end, sort of how the policy can be divided up, and I'll suggest some work groups about how to go about doing that. Any other questions? Okay, I will turn it over then to the canine team. They can introduce themselves and then they'll be up here for just a few minutes, and then I'll come back.
Good evening. My name is Ryan McWilliams. I'm a sergeant at the Bakersfield Police Department. I'm currently assigned as the K-9 unit supervisor, and was lucky enough to come here and give this presentation to you guys. So we'll talk about just briefly our agenda tonight, what I'm going to cover in my presentation. First of all, just kind of a brief introduction to the K-9 unit. I'll tell you about the day-to-day operations. We'll talk about how to become a K-9 handler and just a little bit of the makeup of the K-9 unit. We'll get into how we use K-9s here in Bakersfield at the Bakersfield Police Department. And then we'll jump into the policy changes and the stipulated agreement. So first of all, our K-9 unit was established in 1988. So this isn't new, it's something we've been working on for quite a while now. It's currently made up of 8 K-9 teams. And when I say K-9 teams, I don't mean like a football team. It's not that many people, okay? A K-9 team is simply a police officer, or what we'll refer to as a handler or dog handler, and his dog. That's one K-9 team. Of those 8 K-9 teams, 7 of those are assigned to patrol. They're driving around the city in cars just like that, and they're out there to assist patrol in whatever they need, whatever they can use that dog to do. They also assist investigations, but those 7 K-9 teams that are assigned to patrol are spread across our 5 shifts. So basically we have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week coverage with our K-9s. One of our K-9 teams is assigned to our Violent Criminal Apprehension Team. We refer to them as VCAT. If you guys haven't heard of them, it's just a small undercover team that is basically responsible for apprehending wanted fugitives here in Bakersfield. They do a lot of work for our investigations, our robbery homicide unit. They're the ones that are out there trying to locate people that are wanted for murders, rapes, the worst of the worst crimes. All of our K-9s are dual purpose. And what that means is the purpose that you guys probably all think that you see K-9s out there doing, catching bad guys, tracking suspects, doing apprehension work. They also have a second purpose of detection. Our K-9s are trained to detect narcotics. We have some trained to detect bombs, and we have some trained to detect firearms and ammunition. Dog breeds. There's 2 dog breeds that we use here at the Bakersfield Police Department. Those are Belgian Malinois and German Shepherds. The reason we use those breeds is basically that's the industry standard. Across the United States, across the whole entire world, those are the breeds that are primarily used for law enforcement. The reason being is their size, their agility, their energy levels. Those things all allow those dogs to work really long, hard hours. They allow them to get into tight spaces, overcome obstacles, and really get through a lot of rough terrain. They're really hard, strong, high energy dogs. They're also easily trainable. They're very obedient dogs. So when it comes to keeping control of that animal and getting that animal what you want it to do, it's a much easier breed to use than some of the other breeds that are out there. All of our K-9s live at home with their handlers. So that being said, all those handlers have to have certain requirements at their residence in order to keep a dog there. They have to have proper fencing around their yards. They have to have locked gates. They have to have plans in place of what to do with that dog whenever they have to leave the residence for an extended period of time. You know, if a K-9 handler goes on vacation, he obviously can't take that thing with him to, you know, another state or the beach or, you know, whatever. So we have to make sure that they have plans in place for those types of situations. They also have to allow the K-9 supervisor to come to their residence and inspect those areas on a regular basis to make sure that they're kept up and that they're safe and it's a good environment for the dog. So what does it take to be a K-9 handler? How do you become a K-9 handler once you're a police officer? In order to apply to be a K-9 handler, you have to have 3 years of experience at the Bakersfield Police Department. That's actually something that's recently changed in the new proposed policy. The old policy, it was only 2 years. We decided to add another year of experience for that. You also have to have a single family residence with adequately fenced yard, all the things that we were talking about earlier. You have to be eligible to take a take-home car home so that you can transport the dog to and from your residence and work. If you meet those requirements, then you can apply to be a canine handler whenever we do a testing process. If we have an opening, basically myself or the canine lieutenant would put out a memorandum to the department, and then anybody who meets those requirements can submit a memorandum to us saying they're interested in testing to be a canine handler. Now, along with that, they have to get a hold of their immediate supervisor, and the immediate supervisor has to provide a letter of recommendation for them to test for canine. They're basically saying, yeah, this guy follows the rules, he does good work. I'm signing off on him saying, hey, he's good to go to test for the process. Once they've submitted that, we'll put on a canine handler testing, which will include a physical agility test. We'll have stress scenarios to test the applicant's ability to manage stress and see how they perform under stress. And then that's followed up with an oral interview panel. If they pass all of that, then myself and the other canine supervisors will basically conduct a review of the applicant's work product. We'll go talk to his supervisors. We'll go look at his personnel file. We'll ensure that he is working at a standardized level. He's not working below a work standard. We'll look at his uses of force, see how many times he's used force, and what's going on behind his uses of force. Is he over the top? Is he at norm? Is he below? Just to make sure we're not giving somebody this tool that they're not prepared to use or not capable of using. We look at their compliance with department rules and regulations to see if they've been disciplined at all, especially for anything regarding using force or making bad decisions. Once they pass all that, then we can select them as a canine handler. So once they've been selected, we purchase a dog. They will go down to a canine academy. The canine academy is 10 weeks long. They've got 5 weeks of patrol work that they have to train that dog to do, and then 5 weeks of detection work, where they're training the dog to detect whatever scent that we want it to detect. Like we were talking about narcotics, bombs, guns are the primary ones that we use. At the end of that 10 weeks, they're required to pass a state certification. That certification is recommended by POST. Have you guys heard of POST before? It's the California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training. They're the ones that sets those standards and says, these are the things that you have to do in order to show that you have control of the dog and you're able to deploy it out there on the street. If they pass that certification, at that point they can be deployed out on the street as a canine handler. If they don't pass that certification, it's a no-go. They're not going out there until they pass that. So once they do pass it and they're deployed out there on the street, their training's not done. Training is something that continually has to happen with these canine teams. And POST sets recommended training hours for these dogs as well. They say they have to have a minimum of 16 hours of training with their dog every month. That's the minimum standard. As you guys will see in the policy when you go through it, our standard is about 20 hours. We do 10 hours, we have a 10-hour practice every other week. So they're getting over that 16 hours a month. And then you'll also see in the policy that they're required to do 1 hour of training during their shift every night. So that's going to put them even higher over that basic minimum standard. And then they also have to pass that same state certification every single year. If they don't pass that state certification, they don't go out on the street. And it's not like something that you can study for. I mean, you can, but we don't give it that way. We try to do it as a surprise so that they are maintaining that state certification level all the time. We don't certify our own dogs. We have an outside trainer from another department come in, somebody that doesn't have any kind of monetary connection to the department or, immediate connection to that dog. Those are the people that we come in and certify our dogs or test our dogs. So chain of command. The chain of command for our K9 unit, there at the top is our Special Operations Division Commander, Captain Bobby Wooler. Right here. Then next is our Special Operations Group Commander, Lieutenant Rick Dossie. And then you have two K9 supervisors, myself, and then Sergeant Mason Westner, who couldn't make it here tonight. So just a little bit about the chain of command. This is basically who's responsible for all the accountability and oversight of the K9 unit. They're the ones that are reviewing deployments, they're reviewing engagements, they're reviewing training documentation. So they do have to have a good understanding of how K9s should be deployed, the tactics behind deploying K9s, proper use of them. They have to have an excellent understanding of use of force and decision making and using the proper use of force. They also do a regular review of the policy. You guys will see in the new proposed policy that that's something that has to occur on a regular basis. But basically they're checking that policy to make sure, is it up to standard? Are we in line with what other departments are doing? Are we in line with what the laws of California are right now? And in the past 6 years, I think we've modified that policy at least 4 times at this point. Some of the new policy changes that the chief was talking about earlier. They're not popping up. One of them is the minimum standards for applying to be a K9 handler, which is that 3-year threshold. It used to be 2 years. I changed it to 3 years when I came into the unit. I thought it was more appropriate. We made that change about, I think, 4 or 5 months ago. One of the other changes is we now have a full-time K9 sergeant. This is my job, that's it. I'm K9 sergeant, I don't have any other duties. In the past, being the K9 sergeant was an extra duty position. So you could be an investigation sergeant, you could be a gang unit sergeant, you could be a sergeant in any other part of the department, and then you had all this responsibility as a K9 sergeant on top of that. So we felt that it was more appropriate to have somebody 100% dedicated to the K9 unit all the time. Another change we've recently made is K9 sergeants will now respond to any K9 engagement, day or night, whenever it occurs. In the past, it used to be handled by patrol sergeants. If there was some sort of use of force on the street, then the patrol sergeant responds to that and he conducts the use of force investigation into that. We felt that a K9 engagement is something that's fairly rare, and it's something that is important enough to have a specialist come out to look at that engagement and conduct that investigation, so now only K9 sergeants handle that portion.
They're not cooperating, bro?
Let's go on now. There you go. So how do we use K9s in Bakersfield? How does the Bakersfield Police Department use it? You guys will notice in the new policy, this is right there on the first page, I think it's like the second paragraph. BPD's policies use K9s primarily to assist with searching for and locating persons, narcotics, or drug paraphernalia. BPD will only use K9s as a force tool when reasonably appropriate, which should be a rare occasion. So basically it breaks it down into 2 parts. The primary purpose of that K9 team is a locating tool. They're there to locate suspects who have ran from cars or concealed in a house or have broken into a building. They're there to locate narcotics. You know, we commonly use K9s for vehicle searches in relation to narcotics, residence searches during search warrants, those kind of things when it comes to narcotics. We use our bomb dogs a lot in this town. Whenever we have dignitaries that come to town, we use our bomb dogs to sweep the motorcade that the dignitary is going to be driving in. If there's a really large event at like Mechanics Bank Arena, we'll take the bomb dogs over there, we'll run them through the arena because we're going to have how many thousands of people in there at one time. We want to make sure that there's no devices in there or anything that's going to cause some sort of mass casualty event.
I'm sorry, we're having just a little bit of confusion because they seem to either be printed out, doesn't align with the policy outlined here. So
I'm gonna hand you guys our current policy, and I'm gonna hand you guys the proposed policy, and then the workbook that he was talking about here.
I'm sorry, I
Yep.
had just prepared, I had printed this one out and it doesn't, I don't
So
know.
that doesn't.
This is the proposed policy.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine, you're fine.
I was just aligning with trying to.
Yeah, no, you're good.
follow along.
So this is the old policy.
Good.
No, that's the new one. That is the new one.
That says draft.
So,
If this doesn't align with that, then that's the old reference.
That's the current policy.
One says 310.
The draft number 2 is the proposed policy.
Okay, okay. So this is proposed, this is the old one.
If you look at the back, that's what the two policies is, the proposed one and the current policy. Proposed says draft 2 and policy.
oh.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Out of section 310.2, I didn't put the entire section out of there.
Yes.
I just took the excerpt from the bottom right there that explains the primary use of the canines. So, good?
So that's perfect.
Cool.
That's okay.
No, it's the very bottom portion of the second paragraph. But no, yeah, that's specifically in there.
But, let me interrupt real quick, but before he goes on, are there any questions about, because I think he's getting ready to move into the next phase, is there any questions about the canine unit? Just again, this was just intended to be a really brief overview, but I want to make sure you have some general understanding of what the canine unit size is and any questions related to that.
On the
Canine
training,
unit specific.
on the training for the officers, I know he said that they do the training where they have the training for the K-9 handlers. What training are most of the ranks, supervisors, or are you guys former K-9 handlers yourself? Or what experience did you guys have besides the others?
Yeah, full disclosure, never was a canine handler. Rick, were you ever a canine handler?
I got a crash course. So I've worked for the BPD for 18 years now. Of those 18 years, 16 of those were spent on SWAT. I've started at the bottom of SWAT, worked up to a SWAT sergeant, went to special operations sergeant, and then kind of snuck my way into the canine unit. But as part of that, I took a dog, I went down there, I went through the academy that I was talking about. I handled the dog on the street for a short period of time, and then I went through canine supervisor school that is put on by the same school that does our training, our academy training for the dogs. And then I've attended several other canine supervisory courses, as well as incident management courses, just a lot of stuff for the supervisory side of running a unit like this. But that's my training background.
Okay.
And I can expand on that if you'd like a little bit. Although I was never a canine handler, supervised them over the years, had a tour in the Internal Affairs Division as a commander in that office. But it really gives you an idea that you have to look at things objectively, and especially if you never were a canine handler, you don't have a lot of that pre-knowledge, and you really have to back away when you look at the way that we're training or how the policy is written. And it's interesting how you have to ask those tough questions because of our ignorance of not being a handler. There's nuances that we have to really look at every aspect of it to make sure that we're falling in line. And that's why, what's the industry standard? I don't have the exact answers, and looking out to the outside of our organization to see what is the best practices and how we should be implementing and staying current with the legislation and other agencies that have larger programs than ours that give us some good insight of what nationwide is going to be developed into what we're seeing right now in this current policy proposal that we're presenting to the group. And Rick, you never were a handler, right?
No, I was never a handler. I was on the SWAT team for 10 years. I've also been a homicide detective for about 10, and I also ran the homicide unit, crimes against persons. So I dealt a lot with use of force issues. I'm also on the committee for use of force and updating the policies. That's kind of my expertise, is the use of force side of things. So a lot of the, the canine, yes, it is a different tool that we use. But the canine, you still have to look at the legality of allowing the dog to go and apprehend somebody, or using it as the tool. It's the legality, and it's within the Constitution and the guidelines that the stated laws have put out there. So that's where we look at most of the uses of force, make sure it's legal, it's just, that there was cause to use the animal and stuff like that. So there's a lot of, like you said, nuances that use of force kind of bleeds over into all these other areas.
That's a good question.
All right, I think you guys answered my question. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Couple questions. The violent criminal apprehension team, is
Yes,
that a permanent assignment, or is there a rotation in that position?
It's a permanent assignment, or as far as the canines go, or
The handler and the canine? I
Yeah.
assume that the
no,
canine-
that's a permanent position. Because really what it comes down to is different dogs have different attitudes. They have different capabilities. A lot of those capabilities are based off of how long they've been trained too, right? Like we wouldn't take a brand new canine team and put them in the violent criminal apprehension team because they need more calls out on the street. They need to search for more people where, you know, the majority of the time spent by the VCAT team is doing surveillance, which is extremely boring. That dog's sitting in the back of that car for hours and hours at a time, so it has to be well trained in order to get to that position. And you know, some of these dogs, you put them in a car kennel and they're just doing circles in the back of that car kennel like almost the whole time that you're driving. So they need to get out of it a little bit more. You know, I think some of these dogs may wear all their hair off if they sit back there for too long doing circles. So you gotta have the right team, you gotta have the right dog to put in those kind of positions. So I think the one that we have in VCAT right now is the most senior canine on the team.
And can you talk to us a little bit about gender and racial diversity among the handlers?
Right now, I don't know, I couldn't give you the specifics on racial diversity. They're all males right now. We have had, I know, at least 2 female handlers in the past. Yeah.
Like last year or 5 years ago?
We've had one last year. There was another one. It's been several years that was in there.
And you're not sure of diversity?
No, I don't know. Like, I mean, I could tell you what I assume that their race is, but I don't know specifically what it is. So.
When you guys
Okay.
doing another K9 competition?
Everybody's calling and asking like crazy. I think we've been pretty focused on this for like the past year, so we're kind of like waiting for it to come, but hopefully soon. So, I know the lieutenant was talking about using canines for a use of force, and I did want to get into briefly, that is the second part of this statement, right? When it's reasonable and appropriate, which should be a rare occasion, we can be used as a force tool. But one thing I do want to make very clear is biting is not the only force tool for these dogs, okay? They are a very, very strong de-escalation tool. Just the mere presence of a canine and a canine barking and a canine handler sitting there making announcements. You guys will see in the policy they're required to make specific announcements. They're required to make those announcements at least 3 times before they deploy a canine or send a canine on engagement. Those announcements will say, this is the Bakersfield Police Department. I'm a police officer with a canine. Suspect, make yourself known and give up now. If not, I will send my dog will find you, and he may bite you. Does anybody think that's not a force tool? Especially with a dog barking there? Last year we had 467 people surrender to a canine without engagement. We had a total of 45 canine engagements. So it does work. It's an excellent de-escalation.
Is there,
45 canine
Engagements, yes sir.
Did those result in bites?
An engagement is pretty much a bite. You'll see in there that there's a definition of it. So,
and was those involved where they had a weapon, a knife, a gun, or some type of?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand if it was just them running, but there was no weapon involved.
The chief will be able to expand a little bit more on the stats and, you know, where we're going with use of force and where you guys can find a lot of that information. Now, we're really just trying to give you the brief overview of this, get into the policy, and then let you guys do your work. So, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is there a reason you did, and it's not, it just seems like that is a very good starting of the policy as opposed to finishing it. Because it kind of really describes the use of the dog. Is there a reason why you decided to use it as the closing statement as opposed to the starting statement?
That would probably be the man to ask right there. This is Captain Ted King.
No, that's okay.
He's our field services captain. Previously, he used to do Rick's job. And he was in that job when all this was created and going through. He did the worst part of it. I just had to do the presentation.
As far as the presentation goes, these are talking points, and the real bulk of the information is what you have in front of you. So Ryan's going to get into it a little bit here in just a minute as far as breaking up into some groups where we can really delve into kind of the meat and potatoes of the four quadrants of how we see it. And then we'll be able to answer all that stuff. But as far as what's been presented up here, it's just to get that conversation. So, does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's all. I mean, we'll talk about it later. I was thinking it just kind of sounds like a strong statement that
Right.
could lead the policy.
Yeah, and we're more than happy to give that feedback too, because we can always improve. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to dive into the policy a little bit. I know I came to the last meeting and some of the things that you guys were talking about is this is a lot of information. The stipulated judgment is huge. You have this gigantic policy in front of me that I have to read through. Is there some sort of way that we can, you know, help find these things in the policy or whatever? So I did that for you. I took the entire portion of the stipulated judgment that covers canines. They're all numbered by paragraph, and I created this little book for you guys here with lines on there to take notes under each portion of that policy. If you turn to I think it's page 3. You guys should see this at the top of that page. It should be stipulated judgment, paragraph number 11. Right?
What booklet are you referring to, Ryan?
Just the handout that I gave you. The other two documents in there are our current policy and then the proposed policy.
Proposed has draft 2.
The proposed one has draft 2 on the front of it. So this is stipulated judgment, paragraph 11. It's taken directly out of the stipulated judgment. Okay, this is how it reads in its entirety. I've written it in there. This is where you will find where we've changed the policy with this information in the policy. So policy location 310.5. If you open up the proposed policy, 310.5 should be control of canine, and then you will find the information from the stipulated judgment in there. And I've done that with every single paragraph that covers canine out of the stipulated judgment. So it should help you guys just a little bit. And please, don't think I'm just trying to direct your attention to the changes we've made in relation to the stipulated judgment. That's not what I'm here to do, right? I'm just trying to make it a little bit easier for you guys, but the policy's yours, right? That's why we're here. We're here to get information from you guys on what you think we should be doing and if we're doing things right or not. So any questions on how to use my fancy dancy guide I got over here?
Thank you. Good job.
Cool. Sir?
My turn? You guys need a break? We need to take a break, 5 or 10 minutes? Yes? Yes. Okay, we'll take 10 minutes. Yeah, I know that you can find that. I was just asking.
I think the chief has some more direction. You'll love it. You'll love it. All right, obviously they do because they keep coming back. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm just looking for something that we know. Birdie. Hopefully I see her. I need clearance in my beds.
But it's 2 miles of
Okay, we're going to get started again if that works for everybody. I don't think we lost anybody in the break. Are there any questions on the document so that the proposed, the current, and then the sort of that reference guide? Are there any questions about any of those? And additionally, what will be on Google Docs is this presentation will be on there. But I would be curious if you think of anything else that might be helpful in terms of reference information to start your work in the review. We tried to think about all of those things and get them covered, but if there are some things, let me know. And we'll revisit this at the end. Is that going to be helpful?
Yeah, and I did basically the same thing yesterday.
Okay.
This is perfect.
Okay, very good. Okay, so what I'll cover the next couple of slides is just really some basic definitions and discussions about force. And then we will, I'll answer any questions you might have regarding that. But again, this is really just being offered not for the level of detail, because once we bring the use of force policies to you, this is going to be covered in substantially more detail. But I think it's important to give you some reference as you begin your work and your review of terms and understandings of some of the related items that you'll review. And so again, I just wanted to give you a basic understanding and kind of level set some of these definitions. So when we talk about use of force, here I'll share with a little bit of what our philosophy is. And some of these are specifically highlighted in some of our policies. But that use of force is not a routine part of what we do, nor should it be of what we do every single day. That some of our authority is defined in the law, and that we have serious responsibility to use it appropriately. And then there's some guiding values in the development of our uses of force. That you will see this again in our use of force policies, but they're reiterated here that these are the values that we use to inform our policy and create them. What is force? When we talk about force, we have a common definition. It is the application of physical techniques or tactics, chemical agents, OC spray, canines, or any type of weapon. Any of these items, an application of any of these items on another person to gain compliance or to defend an officer or someone else. That is how force is defined. So when you see it in the policy, when you make references to use of force, we are talking about one of those kinds of things. You'll see this again as we have more in-depth conversations about the use of force policy of what types of circumstances or reasons can force be used. It can be used to effect an arrest, prevent an escape, overcome someone's resistance when you're attempting to arrest them, self-defense of the officer, or in defense of someone else. Again, broad definitions, but this hopefully will give you some grounding of when we're talking about terms and we're talking about justification, we're talking about a variety of things related to that as you look through or review the canine policy. We wanted to give you some foundational knowledge and some understanding of what and how we define force when we talk about it. What are some of the things that we're talking about? Any questions on that? Again, there's lots of detail here and lots of questions, and we're going to get into that in really granular detail when we bring you the use of force policies. But these are some basic definitions. This is incorporating some of the proposed revisions that we're already working on our use of force policy. So you'll see them again very specifically.
Are these universal definitions, or is this?
No, they are not. In terms of the definition of force, I would say it's very, I wouldn't say universal, but I would be surprised if you found a police department with a use of force policy that didn't have these exact things in it. So I wouldn't say it's universal, but I would say it's very, very common. I would be surprised if you didn't see, if you found a policy with something different than this. And then this, because this is guided, and this as well, because this is guided by Supreme Court decisions, state law, and things like that. So some of those things are established. Again, find it very consistent in California in particular. Yes, sir?
Yeah, two questions. How do you all think about related to this preemptive defense, and also how how have you all been thinking about the recent California decision or the recent California law that hires, I guess, the standard around reasonable force to necessary force?
Yeah, and imminent. I mean, the California 392 has changed 835A, which is the penal code that defines the authorization to use force. That has changed in the last year to incorporate imminent, proportionality, reasonable, but also necessary. All of that is being incorporated into our use of force policy. What was the first part of your question?
The first was around preemptive defense, right? So thinking about, I'm thinking about broadly, like, you think that somebody is going to, how do you all train officers thinking like whether or not somebody may attack?
To evaluate a threat? Is that what you mean? Or,
this person looks like they may attack, so let's attack before they attack us.
yeah, you've got to fall into one of these kinds of decisions, one of these kinds of circumstances, and it's got to be based on the law. The law allows reasonable officers, so we have to evaluate what an officer does and what type of incident that they're in and the force that they use. We have to evaluate that based on state law, based on the Supreme Court decisions, and those basically, I'm going to summarize it, basically is what that officer did reasonable? Was it necessary? Was the threat imminent? And the decisions that that officer made, was it reasonable? Would another officer in a very similar circumstance make those same decisions? It kind of draws that correlation and gives you an example of how you need to make that decision. And so that is what all of our decisions are based on is, was it reasonable under the totality of the circumstances, based on all the information that that officer had at that moment? Was it reasonable for someone, and would another officer reasonably, in that kind of circumstance, make the same decision? And that's, again, very summary, but that is an assessment. And that's how we evaluate whether it was justified or not.
But I know it's also with definition of force and even reason. When we look at the applications for definition of force, are a lot of those forces, do they come to the forefront before the taser, or because I know there's nothing on there really.
No. So this is the definition of force. So when we're talking about force, we're talking about an officer applying one of these kinds of things. This gives you the category of things. It could be certainly less lethal. It could be, and that would talk under this physical tactics or techniques. There are some other, it's not listed here, but it is. A taser would be part of that.
Yeah, well,
it also would be a punch or a baton or whatever else.
Yeah,
but
I just asked because I didn't really see.
You didn't see it there? But what we're talking about is the application of some force using a device or personal, a hand or something else applied to another person. That is what force is. Now, there could be other things that are, could be other items there that aren't listed, but it's the use of something on someone to get compliance. That is, by definition, a force.
And I pretty much get that, but I'm just looking at if this is what I was looking at, even if I was training, and I didn't see taser, I didn't see the baton on there, and say a young officer just coming out of the academy, he didn't see taser, baton.
No, you will.
He's seen the K9.
Yeah, no. Yeah, you will, as we get into this, you'll see this is, but what I tried to create was, when we talk about force, what are we meaning? We're meaning the physical application, applying something to someone else to overcome their resistance, to gain control, to do something. We're talking about trying to broaden all the different categories of what force is. Because force is, to not have force would be, it couldn't have been the application of anything on anyone else. So basically somebody's just submitting. That would not be a use of force. But again, we're going to talk in much more detail as we get into the use of force stuff, and I'll even have some here in just a minute when we talk about levels of force, and they're more specifically defined. Because what the level of force is and our level of review also matters. And I'll talk about that here in just a minute too. Yes, sir? Somebody? Oh, yes, sorry. Chuck, go ahead.
Just quickly, in the determination of justifiable use of force, I know that gaining control of the situation is important for an officer to be able to do his job or her job. But my question is are there levels, I'm not even sure exactly how to say that, but for example, a jaywalker runs off. Is a police officer entitled to do anything necessary in order to apprehend and control that person? Or there
Speaking to that scenario, no, a police officer would not be authorized to do anything to bring that person into custody. Absolutely not. It's not reasonable. And it's not, and it would be outside some of the guidance from Supreme Court decisions. That's where our decisions come from. It isn't arbitrary. We're using Supreme Court and decisions and state law to guide this, and it has to be actual facts that have to be evaluated objectively to make that determination. So in your scenario, somebody jaywalking and running off, an officer would not be entitled or justified in doing anything to bring that person into custody. No, absolutely not.
Was that just for jaywalking, or, you know, we do a lot of TikTok and stuff, right? And you see scenarios where officers stop somebody and say, I want to talk to you, and they say, I don't want to talk, and keep walking. Mm-hmm. Now they run because I'm from Arbor, Vermont. I might just don't like talking to the police and I run.
Yeah.
Is that the same as the jaywalking where you don't have enough to...
An officer has to justify. Now, I don't have to justify. I can walk up and talk to you, and you say, I don't want to talk to you, and you just take off. I can't just grab you and stop you because I really want to talk to you. No, I can't do that.
Does the imminent threat has to be present in order for physical force to be applied?
Force, it has to be one of these things. Right? These are the reasons force can be used. And again, I appreciate the conversations. Yeah. Overcome resistance, self-defense, and defense of others. But it's got to be evaluated in this totality of the circumstances, guided by some of these decisions. You guys are asking really very good questions. And again, that's why I tried to front load it, that this is very surface level. There is tremendous detail that needs to go into this, and we're going to do that when we get into the use of force. But I wanted you to just a basic overview of what this is so that you can have some context to things when you're reading. We're going to go into significant detail when you see the use of force policy, specifically. So, great questions, just be patient with me a little bit, and we'll get there. But again, I'm trying to give you just a very scratched surface with some common understanding.
We're going to get to that. That's a reasonable answer.
We are going to get to that.
I was going to speak to the fact of criminal history that an officer has gotten over the radio about a person goes into that decision making.
A criminal history of someone that somebody gets over the radio, could that be a factor in determining whether or not
whether
stop someone?
The use of force.
No, not in and of itself isolated, absent all the other circumstances. Getting just information on someone's criminal history? No. Is it a factor? Should it be? And would it be a factor in consideration in the totality of something, whether an officer ended up using force? What role that played? Yeah, that could. But it would have to be very specific information, and it would have to cause an officer to make one of these very instantaneous decisions to do one of these things, and it would have to be justified. Again, consistent with the law, not just whether I think it's justified.
That this person has been known to be armed and dangerous, right?
Not in and of itself. Not isolated without any other factors. No, that was not. Okay, we'll get through. So, I'm sorry, yes.
For the future aspect, does that department outline all allowable practices of force, or is it just sort of, and I know we'll get to it in the future, but yeah, I'm just curious, is it like any type of force that can be used, any type of tactic or technique, are those all outlined, like the allowable, or is it sort of, I'm using like the example of like hog tying, right? Or
yeah, we don't do that. Well, let me get a little bit further and we'll revisit that question.
Sure.
And maybe that'll help make sure that I answer the question that you want. Again, very surface level things, but I wanted to give you some what the Supreme Court decisions are and the law that have a lot to do with the foundational elements of uses of force and how it's evaluated and where it makes it legal or not, under what kinds of conditions. We're guided by these laws. So again, just offering them as some foundational documents and references. In California in particular, agencies must establish policies. So, I'll get it for you. So agencies must establish policies and provide guidance to officers on how to use force. So we do that. Police officers are responsible for understanding what the policies are, understanding how to employ them. That is part of our foundational system with regard to use of force and what we expect from people and what's required. But also, as we define our policy, so as we build a policy, we incorporate the law. We certainly incorporate what California requires, some very specific language. But the community's perspective is also very important. As we understand what our community's needs are, what the concerns are, and what the expectations of the police department are. And this is an example of the work that we're doing together and will do over the next couple of years is going to be an example of how our community should have a voice in how we operate and how we're going to be purposeful in doing that. Here's the levels of force. We have 4 levels of force. This is being incorporated into our proposed policy as well. So I don't know if this further defines what you were going to ask. Like we have level 1, which doesn't result in any complaint of pain. An example of that is a verbal command, hey, come here, stop, that sort of thing. Intentionally pointing a firearm at someone, giving a command, arcing a taser perhaps, but there's no physical contact. There's no injury, there's no complaint of pain. Controlling force, the level 2, is not likely to result in injury, but may result in a complaint of pain. So an example of a control hold, putting somebody in a twist lock, tackling them, taking them down to the ground. Level 3, intermediate force, likely to result in physical pain or injury. Examples of this. These are the categories of force or tools that would fall into those different levels. And then deadly force, obviously, the highest level.
I guess I'm asking more so you have all the examples out there. Is there, within the policy or just in general for departmental reasons, like a list of all allowable types of force within each of the categories? So like a list that says tasing, like for level 1, these are the specific techniques that are allowable, right? For level 2, control, like science facts, body weight takedown, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or is it just general? Or are they just more general, right?
Are you asking if the policy lays out like scenarios or circumstances, or no?
It's just a list of all of the techniques that you can use, that you could possibly use in the force of
all of our uses of force policy cover and have detailed of what is authorized, what force officers, or what implements and tools officers are authorized to carry, what we train with them, what they're prohibited from doing, obviously except in perhaps a deadly force situation. So I think if I'm following you, the answer to your question is yes, but not if it's specific to a scenario, if the policy lays out that, because that would be impossible. Am I answering this question? Okay, hang on just a second. I'm asked the guys in the room, am I answering his question? Do you feel like I'm not answering it?
I think you're kind of missing a little bit.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure.
And I think the answer to your question is no. We don't have it set exactly that this is the only thing that I can use, right? And there's an important reason for that. When we point out the guidelines, as far as like, here's your left boundary, here's your right boundary of level 1, 2, 3, and 4. But the officers have trained techniques, trained tools to operate within those levels. Sometimes there's circumstances that are outside of that. And I can give you an example. So, you know, like you drive a car, right? You have a driver's license. What side of the road do we drive on? The right side. The right side. Do you ever drive on the left? When you're passing are you taught in school or driver's training or whatever, how to drive on a left? No, not really, you know, but it's necessary, it's something that's legally allowed. Now, same thing when we're talking about uses of force, if somebody has, say Eugene here, has no weapon with him, and there's a bad guy around, does he need to be trained on using this chair, or does it all of a sudden become reasonable that he and his family are being attacked? So he might do something that's readily accessible. You know what I mean? And if we try to get that granular with our definitions, then we either have a policy that's this big that nobody can remember, or we inevitably miss something. Yeah. So that's why there's like a path that they all have to know, all the officers are trained in, all the equipment, and then there's some boundaries that we say, you know, we want you to work within these, and if you go outside of these, it's your job to explain what made that reasonable. And if it's not reasonable with our levels of review, then that's where we address that. So, does that make sense? Yeah, that makes sense.
Is that where you were after?
That's right.
Okay, good. Thank you for doing that. Do you have another question?
Levels of force?
Yes.
What about officer presence? Just the.
That would be one.
That would be.
Yeah.
And-
Well, officer presence is not a force.
Well, but I mean, coming into a situation, just sometimes engaging, some community members may feel that is, officer presence could constitute potential use.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just.
I understand what you're saying, but it is not,
It is not
us
right.
being present or standing somewhere is not by itself a definition of force by our policies. I understand what you're saying, and I can understand what you're saying, but by definition, it's not a
What would you define it as? I know exactly what you're saying. How would you define that? An officer's present almost antagonistic, like.
Well, not even, well,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but I mean. not-
It could be that, yeah.
Coming into, say people are in the park and in Mill Creek,
Yeah.
and you walk into that
Yeah.
situation, you're not even
Right.
there to do anything, but
Yeah.
in your presence of being there, they might, they may see, oh, why are they here?
Right.
It is-
Well, I'll use an example, and this is actually a BPD example. Not many years ago, but some years back, I had BPD come out to my house. I didn't call BPD, the ex-wife called BPD. My window was the size of 3 of these windows, where officers was able to see me through the glass. They still kicked in the front door, came in and all when I said, you can see me, you don't have to enter. But they still kicked in the front door and took me in for psychiatric evaluation. And I said, where was the use of, why was the force used when you see me unarmed, standing in front of the glass window? They still said, because the ex-wife said she thinks I have problems when I'm standing there in front of them talking to them, civilized.
So
So I'm just saying, sometimes we know, even going through academy, you train on these are the rules, these are the laws, but then like some people learn when they come out the academy, or some of the training officers, sometimes the things you learn in training is not always going to be done like that on the outside.
Well, when it's not, we want to know what about it. And I think you will learn over the next couple of months as we get into some of these policies, the kinds of systems that we have and what we are utilizing to make sure that we have appropriate oversight and understanding of that. The levels of review of reports, the inspections and the audits and the different things that we do even randomly with body cams and a variety of other things. You're going to learn what some of the quality control tools that we've been able to implement and what we have implemented to make sure that we're reviewing and make sure that what we say and what we expect officers to be doing in the field that they're actually doing. And when it doesn't happen, we want to know about it. And we address it when it does.
I know, because I call in when I see officers do wrong.
Yes.
The only reason I brought officer presence up is just because if you engage the reaction of the people that you encounter, and if the officers are aware that just by sometimes walking upon the scene, it may be interpreted not as they intended it to be interpreted, just because a uniform and a utility belt just kind of to the person that they're engaging with may be a level of force that it's not intended, but that's what it's
No, I'm totally getting you, I'm understanding what you're saying. What I'm referencing back here is by policy to define very specific things, to make sure that when force is used, by these definitions, we have an ability to make sure that it gets reported, that we're tracking, that we understand all of these things, right? I'm not talking about a much broader, I'm talking about a very technical definition. That's why I started at the beginning. This is a very surface level, but I'm also dealing with very technical terms that are really driven in policy so that we make sure that officers are behaving appropriately. What you're talking about really goes toward community trust and engagement and all of those kinds of things that we're working on. And there's going to be, well, you just reviewed in the strategic plan, what's behind a lot of those efforts and what we've defined is to reduce that level of fear in the community, and so that we can have appropriate engagements with our community members in the middle of a park and everybody feels safe. I mean, that's where we want to. And so that's why I keep coming back to this is a very technical definition of an officer actually making contact with someone, utilizing some physical force, how that's defined, because this is relevant to the canine policy and the levels of oversight and reporting requirements and things that you're going to review. That's why I'm sharing this, so you have just a basic understanding of what we're talking about. And when we use some of these terms, when you read some of the terms in the policy, you'll have a little bit of another reference to kind of guide, does that make sense? Is that what we should have? Is that what we want? That sort of thing. Does that make sense?
No, it totally,
Okay.
I get it. I was just kind of.
Yes, and this may be what, related to what we're saying, but one of the things in the first year reported by the monitors was what about the board bringing up several times that we have emphasis on respect for life. And with that being interpreted as not our technical policy, but it's like the quote, the general thing, where you would evaluate, am I being respectful, am I being maternal to the
Yeah. And some of those very specific terms are in our use of force policy that we'll be coming to, on the sanctity of life and recognizing that and treating people with dignity and respect, because I absolutely expect that to happen. And when it doesn't happen, we want to know about it.
So how do we know which levels we should be?
So that's what I'm saying. There's some examples here. I'm sorry?
How do we know which levels should be most appropriate?
Well, this gives you an identification of the levels of force that we have in policy. And then the determination of whether what was used was appropriate is really the other part of what I was talking about. We're guided by state law. We're guided by the Supreme Court decisions on what they set as a minimum standard that must be there and what conditions must be there for force to be reasonable. And then we have to look at the totality of the circumstances. And it's the combination of all of these things when we make a determination of whether a use of force was appropriate. There's not any one single thing.
And is that determination whether it's appropriate or not determined on the report being filed, or is that going to be the standard?
A report is filed in every use of force. Yep.
So if someone reports that the level of force was extra, right? Would you have already been able to see that in the report? Is that going to automatically be reviewed?
So whenever there is a use of force, a supervisor goes to the scene and investigates it, talks to the officer that used force, talks to the suspect that had force used on him, and works with the team there to identify any witnesses to the force as well. That happens in every single use of force. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but.
Well, there's just that one person. I mean, there's a lot of reports that, a lot of stories that I've heard and seen on video that it was being justified. So, do you feel with the new policy that is being created with us will be more defined, so that way we will have, we can potentially have less justified uses of forces on our community? So
the use of force law has changed in California with regard to some of the things we talked about with the imminent proportionality and the immediacy of threats. Certainly, that's part of that. So all of that is incorporated into that. Yeah, do I think over time that we're going to see lower levels of force? Yeah. One of the reasons, I think, because we're getting better at what we do. I'm very proud of where we are as an organization and what we are trying to do to make sure that our people are properly trained and how to use force when it's absolutely necessary, but goes to the other things that we were talking about that also work to develop relationships with our community, understand how to talk to people, understand how to de-escalate. You'll hear a lot more about that when we bring the use of force policy to you. And we'll give you some detailed examples of all the different things that we're doing. When we talk about de-escalation, what is it that we're talking about? How do we define it? And what do we expect officers to do in the field? Because that is all being reviewed as part of a use of force review as well. Did the officer de-escalate the situation? What kinds of tactics, what kinds of language did they use? There's a variety of things that we're evaluating to go in there. So yeah, use of force generally has dropped in the police department over the last 3 or 4 years, substantially. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I can tell you that it's dropped.
Is that due to, I know BPD has cameras, body cam now. Is that due to the BPD coming in with more body cam now?
We had body cams. When did we go full deployment? In 2020 or 2021? 2020 we reached full deployment. Yeah, I think it may have an effect. I think it's probably too soon to tell you exactly, but you can go back 3 or 4 or 5 years, and our use of force has dropped even from that time. And I think there are a lot of factors. Some of it is what I'm just talking to you about now. We're working to be more intentional about how we're trained, how we oversight, or the oversight that we provide, because part of what happens in uses of force reviews, if we see somebody that needs some training, some additional training because of a tactic or strategy that they use that doesn't make sense, or it just was a wrong application of what we've taught them, we're very quick now, much quicker than we ever have been, to go back and retrain them. And so I think it's a combination of all of those things that have led to a reduction, but body cams I think certainly is a part of it. Okay, any questions on the levels of force? Again, you're going to have much more of this conversation in much more detail as we get into use of force policies. But again, I think this is important for you to get some information to talk about it. So we've already covered some of this. And again, just want to give you some general guidelines on what use of force reporting and supervision responsibilities are. So when an officer uses force, they have to document it promptly and thoroughly in a report. Any use of force beyond the level 1, an officer goes out to the scene, supervisor goes out to the scene and receives that report firsthand and does an investigation. All uses of force above level 1 must be reviewed by a captain. That's a relatively new process for us. And then any use of force involving a canine has to go to the rank of captain. Both of those are higher levels of review than we ever have had. And you'll see those reflected in the use of force policy as well. Okay. We offered this as a suggestion. And the guiding document that Sergeant McWilliams gave you will help you with it as well. But we've looked at the new policy, and we've divided it into 4 different groups. Sort of a personnel and responsibility category, some operational guidelines is one category, specific training in the policy is one, and then the administration responsibilities of the canine unit. We saw those as kind of 4 separate sections that we could offer and might offer and suggest to you in terms of dividing up the work and how you might decide to do that. I'm going to ask you to actually, as you do your review and your research, to come back to us with some recommendations. Certainly we want your input on whether or not you think that the proposed canine policy is aligned with the stipulated judgment. And then we also want you to do research and review and come back to us with points of clarity that you think the policy could be more clear in certain areas, or if you think that there are other agencies' policies or other best practices that we should consider and incorporate into the policy. And I would ask you to make sure that they're evidence-based. It's very important that as we implement policies across the department, not just this one, we want to make sure that they're sound, make sure that they're tested, that they've been approved by courts in a variety of different types of circumstances such as that. So we would ask you that that's what you do. Over the next, I think I have another slide here, but The CAP at bakersfield.pd.us is what I would ask you to use for any questions over the next couple of weeks before we meet again. If you've got additional documents that you need, feel free to reach out to this, send an email to this website or this address, or you can call Babette in the chief's office. She's my assistant, and we'll get information directly to you. The last thing I would offer, I think it's the last thing, yeah, is sort of a schedule. We talked a little bit earlier, at least I led into the meeting talking about how important deadlines are for us, and we're going to try to make sure that we fulfill our commitments to you in terms of timelines, but it's also going to be important that we as a group establish some deadlines and timelines for us to do the work. And so this is May, June, and July. So obviously tonight we're meeting with some presentations of materials. We're having some open discussions. So I would ask your group over the next couple of weeks to begin doing your review. You read the policies, do some review and research. The first week of June, you can continue that activity. We meet again in a month. And at that meeting, I'm thinking, one, we're going to bring you our responses on the Community Engagement Strategic Plan. But that would also be an opportunity for you to ask some clarifying questions. As you've had some time now to do the work and do review, this would be an opportunity in that meeting for us to either provide more clarity on some of the areas that seems to be unclear, additional documents or information that you might need in your review and recommendations. And then, so we meet again in a month, and then the next 2 weeks, again, kind of working amongst yourselves in your different groups, continuing to do your review and your recommendations, and preparing for the groups to submit their recommendations to us. And the plan would be for you to have your recommendations to us on the K-9 policy by the July meeting. That we could review and receive them. We could ask any any clarification that we need from reviewing your recommendations at that meeting. Yes?
We don't really have a group for this.
I know, that's what I was going to say. So I know we're a little bit challenged here tonight because a small group is here. But I think it's really important, and I want to hear from you, but I think it's really important that we commit to these guidelines, because the work that we're doing is really important. And we have much of it to do. So I really want to try to create some guardrails and to keep us focused and to keep us on track. But we want to make sure that we support you in the way that we can. So you might remember we kind of assessed there's kind of 4 different sections. Again, this presentation will be on Google Docs for your further review. You guys may decide that you want to divide it in different ways. It's entirely up to you. But yeah, if you want to keep the same groups, I would ask, though, that you consider dividing up into subcommittees, because we are a large group total, and there's a lot of work to do, a lot of areas to cover, so it makes sense that we would divide up into subcommittees. But within each subcommittee, it may be very important. Again, I would offer the suggestion that somebody be designated as sort of somebody that asks the questions or sets the schedule or determines how your particular group is going to meet. So again, we're a little bit challenged tonight because much of the rest of the panel is not here. And so I would be open to some suggestions from you on how we can might handle the setting of the different committees, and want you to like your input on
I would
that.
kind of ask one of the questions, since you just listed the committee, the groups we already had. We had 4 different groups. How many of the groups are present today? If each one of those 4 groups is present, then you may be able to just reach out to the ones that's part of their group and then grab one of the sections.
Yeah, I mean,
I might say that changing up groups is also a good thing, because we all kind of need to coordinate with each other and share ideas. And if we stay in the same groups, we may not get all perspectives from decisions on different issues. This is a completely different issue than community engagement. So.
I would agree with you, and I think it's important that, and I would invite all of you, no matter what group you're in, to make sure you review the policy in its entirety. And understand that.
But the point is, we short on members, so if you don't have the other members here, you don't know where they're going to go. So we have to kind of just look at what we have to,
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is we can still make our decision independent on previous groups, decide which area we want to go in, and then when new members come
Yeah.
in, they can make their selections and align to whatever group we establish tonight and say, if you want to do this group, do this group, if you want to do that group.
how are they gonna know who to contact on that unless we?
Well, hopefully when they show up next time, we can.
Well,
But we need to have an answer.
if you want to take your lead, if you want to sort of sit here tonight with who's here and sort of designate some people to be on different groups, and then we'll record sort of who's on what group, if you want to self-select that tonight, and then I'll have our staff send out an email to everyone else saying, these are the 4 groups, this is who's already on these groups, please assign yourself to one of the assigned groups, to have no more than 4 or 5 people on them, and that way everybody has an opportunity to do that, and then they'll be supplied with this as well so they know how the work needs to get done. Yes?
I would actually suggest, and we'll keep the same groups, but each group review the entire policy. It is only 18 pages, and I think it's completely different areas with that divide. I think I personally would rather.
Yeah, they are divided up before the session.
I kind of like that idea, and then when we come back in June, then we could establish some other small groups. People want to take on a specific part of it, then we can switch groups or organize some more focused groups. But I think for now, we should probably stick with.
Just to get going.
Yeah, because we got, we're together on, on the FaceTime call and worked a little bit last time, and I think it's probably a good idea to read and review. And
Do we have representatives from all 4 groups here tonight?
Group 1, yes. Group 2, who's group 2?
I believe 5.
We did the first one. Here's the first one.
All right, so group 1, group 2 was, who was group 2?
I think I was on them too.
Group 3, we was group 4.
Is anybody from group 3 here? The previous group? Okay. All right, what about this? What about if we just, let me ask you this. Does this make sense to you? I mean, obviously you can change the groups, but we've assessed that if we were going to do it, we kind of break it out into these 4 different groups. So what I would do is I would offer that as a group, and then we can send out saying, here's the 4 groups that need to be formed. Please self-select on which group you want to. You can, through email, you can communicate back to our staff. We can work, and then you have self-organized. We'll assist in identifying who's a member of each group, so that everybody knows, and we'll share that. We can certainly help facilitate that if that makes sense, since we are so few here tonight. Yeah.
Well, but I think some of us didn't agree that we would like to review the whole policy.
No, I think everybody should review the whole policy, but each committee, let me ask you, make sure that I understand what you're asking. Each committee, each subcommittee, each group needs to work, certainly I would ask that you prioritize recommendations for that section, but I also would ask you to review the entirety of the policy as well. And I think that there should be some communication amongst groups if you have ideas on what the recommendation should be, even if it's outside of your working group. But perhaps that's not asking or answering.
And I don't think it will still go into the same as before. Just because you're working on this group 1, if somebody from group 2 want to send you some things that they thought about, they can still add it to yours. Like you did before when you said you had yours, and if there was any additional things that we wanted to say, we could have emailed you or gave you some of our.
I think there's a lot, I think it's really important to do that. So if we're good with this, we'll throw out there sort of the 4 groups that need to be formed. We'll ask you to self-select. We'll record that. We'll identify who the 4 groups are. But again, I would encourage everybody to read the policy and offer suggestions to the other groups. I would also point to you in terms of recommendations and formatting. The Bakersfield Community Collaborative report. I think that was authored by Dr. Burrows from CSUB. I think is a really important and useful guide in terms of how to format your recommendations and things. It was very well organized, very direct. It had references to what you're exactly talking about. So I would, I'll actually share that on Google Docs so that you guys can use it as a guiding document, because I think it really is really put together very well and very clear. And so it would be very helpful if we get that back in some organized form like that. That will certainly expedite our review. So we'll identify the 4 groups that need to be formed. Again, defer to you guys if you want to change them. We can certainly do that. But I think some of this makes sense to do. And then we'll ask you to respond to an email and self-organize on what groups you're going to be part of. And then we'll record that and identify who the groups are. And then you can get to work. Make sense? Okay. This presentation will be shared. It'll be on Google Docs tonight as well, or tomorrow, as well as the collaborative report, the final report that really is formatted really well. And I think it would be useful because we're working internally to try to identify what's the best way to respond to you. And I think that's a really good example and something that we're using as well. Okay. Any questions about anything else? Are we clear as mud, Karina, on what we're going to do?
Yeah,
okay.
I'll let you what we're going to do.
All right.
Yeah.
Hey, Chief, the packet,
Yes.
is that going to be put on the Google Docs?
Uh-huh. Your reference? Yes.
There's more hard copies of that if anybody wants an extra one to give to other members of their group or whatever we've got over.
Does anybody need an extra copy of the, or want an extra copy of the reference? Okay. You should have a hard copy of the reference, the current policy, the proposed policy. On Google Docs, there will be this presentation and the collaborative report. One other thing, anything else that you think you need at this point in terms of documents from us to begin your review? Did you have a question, Chuck?
Just, I think that I've missed a couple meetings, and I'm sorry, and I'm not clear on the dividing up into the groups. I think it sounds like we may need a little help in putting that together.
So, yeah, so tomorrow my staff will send out a set of groups that people that you need to respond by email of what group you want to be part of. We'll record everybody's input, form the groups, and share that information with everybody so that you know what group you're in and who's in your group with you. The last thing I'll offer is we're also going to put the proposed policy on our website. And we're going to ask the community, we're going to publicize it to the community that this proposed policy will be on our website, and ask our community at large to go to the website, review it, and we're going to give them the information on the email address so that our community at large can participate in this and offer comments as well. We're going to leave it up on there for the next 30 days, and I intend to bring back to you at our June meeting whatever comments or suggestions we've gotten from the community. We'll bring those back and give those to you so that you can have that in the other broader community's input for your recommendations when you make them. Yes.
You're going to send something out. You're going to wait for everybody to respond.
Yeah, and so what I would ask, and this will be an email as well, is that when you're responding to what group you're in, what role do you want to play? Are you willing to lead the group? And so that, we organize it in a way that everybody knows who they're working with. Okay, any other questions or anything else that we need to do tonight? Okay, thank you very much for being here and appreciate all your work. Thank you very much. We'll see you in a few weeks.
One more person.